So, good morning everyone and welcome. It's my very great pleasure and privilege to welcome Jetsunma to talk to us here. It seems like a dream that we managed to be able to host her. I don't think Jetsunma needs much introduction to anyone, so I'm not going to take up any space or time, but just to say how delighted we are to have you with us. Thank you.
Oops. These halls never have clocks. So, good morning everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you all. It's a very lovely hall. So I assume you all have these, yes? Does anybody not have? Everybody has their pages. Yes, just the one, just this. It's the same thing. So we'll get started. So this was written originally, spoken originally probably, by someone called Dipankara Atisha or Cho Atisha, who was a Bengali scholar and practitioner. He in around the 11th century. In fact, he was born in what is today modern Bangladesh. And he was the abbot of one of the huge monastic universities of India in those days. And he also spent many years in Indonesia, in Sumatra. Then he was invited to Tibet. But at that time, he was already, I think, in his 50s. And of course, to get to Tibet from India was extremely difficult. And so he said, no, I'm too old, I can't go. And meantime, the king of Western Tibet, whose name was Yeshe, he had been captured by some rival gang and imprisoned. And they held him up to ransom and said that they wanted the weight of his head in gold in order to ransom him. So his people collected that much gold for him. And then the king said, no, don't bother with me and my life. Take this gold and offer it to Atisha and tell him that, you know, I'm offering my life for him to come to Tibet, which they did, and the king was subsequently beheaded. But, of course, then what could Atisha do? So he went to Tibet. He was also very much encouraged to do so by Aryatara, who was his main deity. And she told him that although it would shorten his life, it nonetheless would be of enormous benefit to sentient beings. So he went there, and when he went there, what is important about him is that at that time, of course, Tantra was very widespread in Tibet. It had been introduced in Tibet by the 8th century. But as happened in subsequent countries where Tantra spread, including Theravadan countries like Sri Lanka, Burma, they have tantric temples there, not allowed by public, but they're there. Thailand and India and all over. The problem was that Tantra can also emphasize power and magic. In India now, if you say Tantra, everybody shivers. You know, they're very afraid because it is associating people's mind with black magic. And because it does give a lot of clairvoyant powers, which in themselves are neutral, they could go either way. And so when Atisha got to Tibet, he saw there was a lot of emphasis on powers. You see it in Milarepa. Those of you who have read the biography of Milarepa, you know, he starts out by being a black magician, and all the way through, there's a lot of emphasis on being able to fly, on being able to multiply your bodies, on being able to walk through walls. There's a lot of emphasis on that kind of thing at that time. And so Atisha, when he got to Tibet, he said, uh-oh, wait a minute. Let's get back to fundamentals. Refuge. Refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Bodhicitta, the aspiration for why are we doing these practices? Not for the sake of enhancing ourselves, but for the sake of benefiting all beings. Trying to wake up so that we can wake up everyone else. That's the only reason. It's based on compassion. And so he emphasized over and over and over the importance of going for refuge, of cultivating genuine compassion in our motivations, that we are doing this for the sake of others, not for the sake of ourselves, and so forth. And he also introduced what is called lojong, or mind training, which is to do with taking everything, especially the difficulties of life, onto the path. Difficult people, difficult circumstances, all the painful things which happen to in our life, rather than seeing those as a disadvantage and as an obstacle, we recognize them as being our opportunity for further enhancing our practice. So these very important emphasis that he brought to Buddhism at that time in Tibet has pervaded the whole of Tibetan Buddhism ever since. And so though his own particular tradition died out, it was incorporated by everybody else. And so all the traditions in Tibet now have the view and the teachings of Atisha as their fundamental. Many, many books and teachings by all the great lamas of all the lineages on not only Atisha, but his followers. There are some very basic texts which are commented on again and again and again by lamas of all traditions. So he was very, very seminal and important in Tibetan. This is why, to my mind, the Tibetans kept on track. They didn't degenerate just into magic and mystery, however much people want to think they did. They actually stayed very on track, and they produced such extraordinary enlightened beings all the way along up until the present day. And a large part of this was because he really made the foundation there very, very strong. Why are we doing these practices? Is it to enhance ourselves, or is it out of compassion for the world? Endlessly repeated again and again and again, as you will see here. So Atisha was very, very important. In the old days, I used to think he was kind of boring. But now I see he was so important, so important. What a great being he really was. No wonder Tara wanted him to go to Tibet to help them out. So this short text, he wrote many books. He was a great scholar. But this very short text is very helpful. It's his main disciples, his main students asked him. They said, oh, the Dharma is so vast, and we don't know where to start, and, you know, please just give us a few pointers as to the really essential, the quintessential teachings that we need on the path. And so therefore he gave this teaching in which he takes each thing and says, the supreme of this would be, the supreme of this would be. Each just one-liners. It's in Tibetan, it's about this big. But it has a lot packed into it. So we will get started, at least. So in the Tibetan tradition, the second thing is that traditionally one does not study a text until it has been read to you by someone who themselves have had it read by somebody who themselves have had it read, all the way back to the author. So that it's like a candle lighting a candle, lighting a candle. There's a sense of transmission. So in Tibetan, this is called the lung, and it's usually translated as an oral transmission. It means that you don't study a text until it has been read for you by someone who themselves has had it read to them. So normally, and in Tibetan, when you ask for a lung, the lamas are very skilled at reading at breathneck speed, which is usual, because if a book is this long, you know, and they read very, very fast. But we won't do that. I was thinking, should I do, I have the Tibetan here, but I think I'll read it in English so that you understand what we're saying. It doesn't take long. A teacher's Lojong root, verses on training the mind. I hope you have this translation. I don't know. There are various translations. If I'm reading a translation you don't have, then I will change, okay? But my text here says, the supreme understanding is to realize the meaning of selflessness. Yes? Okay. The supreme spiritual discipline is to tame one's own mind. The supreme great quality is altruism. The supreme oral instruction is to observe the mind at all times. The supreme remedy is to know that nothing has self-nature. The supreme conduct is to be in disharmony with the world. The supreme accomplishment is a continuous decrease of disturbing emotions. The supreme sign of accomplishment is a continual decrease of wishes and wants. The supreme generosity is non-attachment. The supreme ethical conduct is to pacify one's mind. These next are the 6 paramitas, or the 6 qualities required for enlightenment: generosity, ethic, conduct, patience, effort, concentration, and wisdom. The supreme patience is to take the lowest place. The supreme effort is letting go of activity. The supreme concentration is not altering the mind. The supreme wisdom is not to grasp onto anything as a self. The supreme spiritual teacher is the one who exposes our hidden flaws, and the supreme instruction is the one that helps us to strike at those flaws. The supreme companions are mindfulness and alertness. The supreme inspiration is enemies, hindrances, disease, and suffering. The supreme method is to be natural. The supreme way of benefiting is to help others enter the Dharma. And the supreme benefit is a mind that turns towards the Dharma. So we will go through these slowly. So he kind of throws us straight into the deep pool, and either at this first verse we sink or we swim. The supreme understanding is to realize the meaning of selflessness. Okay, in all Buddhist schools, there is the understanding that the way we perceive our reality is based on delusion. We don't see things as they really are, because we see everything through the lens of our conceptual thinking mind, which is powered by our ego, our sense of self. And because of that, the ego naturally solidifies everything. It solidifies our sense of self, that we are something which is unique, permanent, enduring. And it also solidifies our external reality, which we will be dealing with in a few verses down below. So here we're dealing with our sense of I. And this was very crucial to the whole Buddhist view of how things really are. Nobody is as ego-bashing as the Buddhists. All genuine spiritual traditions, not just Buddhist, any genuine spiritual tradition recognizes that we are far more than we imagine ourselves to be, and our small self is blocking off our realization and recognition of something so much greater than ourselves, which is our true nature. But no one has been so meticulously focused on exposing the machinations of our egocentric consciousness. When the Buddha talked about selflessness, in Sanskrit that's anatman, in Pali, of course, anatta. What did he mean? The question is, what did he mean by atta or atman? Atman is the Sanskrit word for I. And so when he was saying there is no I, what did he mean? Clearly he did not mean that we do not exist. I mean, we do exist. What he was, I don't know. I mean, if the Buddha was here, what would he say? But essentially, he was focusing on this concept which we have of ourselves as existing, separate, unchanging, immutable, something which is enduring through all the ups and downs. There is me. And with that me comes everyone else who is non-me, the other. And the Buddha said that concept of I and other is our fundamental delusion. Because if we look for it, it can never be found. It's like peeling the layers of an onion. Layer after layer after layer. A lot of meditation is just dealing with that. Searching for where comes this fundamental sense inside us that we exist separately and immutably. Apart from everyone else out there, all little globules of self-existent being. And so this insight that the whole prism of how we view ourselves and our relationship with others is fundamentally distorted, is the underlying wisdom as well as the underlying ignorance. That's where wisdom and ignorance part company. Either we realize it or we don't realize it. And when we don't realize it, and we do think that we're self-existent, separate little globules of being, then we suffer. We suffer because we are constantly trying to attract to us that which is pleasurable in the hope it will bring us happiness and satisfaction, and trying to ward off and avoid anything which seems to the ego unpleasant, painful. And this is very self-defeating because, first of all, everything is impermanent. Everything is changing moment to moment to moment. Today everything is going fine. Tomorrow it all falls apart. We don't know. People are changing, external circumstances are changing, everything is changing, but we want to make it static and secure. But it's not secure. It's flowing moment to moment to moment to moment to moment, and we're grasping onto it and trying to make it real and true, and well, it ends up with this constant frustration, which is our daily life. And why, despite the fact that we have so much, we live, even the poorest of us, more comfortably than a Chinese emperor. If you saw how Chinese emperors lived, you'd understand. I mean, really, we have so much indulgence as far as our physical form is concerned, and also the richness of our intellectual stimulation, and we're still miserable. We're still unsatisfied. We still think, if only, if only, if only. Everything would be fine, if only. Now, when the Buddha, it seems to me, that when the Buddha was talking about non-self, he was talking about this very quite ordinary sense that we have of being self-existent and permanent. Everybody has I, and the universe revolves around me, 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 me. That's what he was talking about. And so he reduced that to a physical component, the body, and then the 4 mental components, such as perception and feeling and mental formations and consciousness. And he said, if you look in any of that, you know, we get sensory input, and that is then you know, dealt with, analyzed by our mental consciousnesses and all our habitual tendencies and so forth. But if you try to find something permanent and unchanging in all of that, there's nothing there. You can't find anything. But it goes so fast that we think there's a continuity. But when one meditates, one sees that actually it's a moment to moment to moment transition. There's no self there. But of course, that doesn't mean we don't exist at all. It just means that we don't exist in the way that we think we do. There's a lot of very fast, fancy footwork going on. And if we really begin to calm down and really look inside, we begin to uncover deeper and deeper levels of consciousness, beyond the surface consciousness in which we normally live, the surface of the ocean with the waves going up and down. Deeper than that are deeper levels of consciousness. But none of them can be said to be me and mine. And when we get down to the very deepest level of what the Buddha originally called the unconditioned, or the unborn, as a support for the conditioned and the born, that is where we are all very deeply interconnected. You see that our ego consciousness disconnects us. It is based in duality. It is based in the past and the future. We always are thinking about the past and comparing and judging and endlessly. It's very difficult for us to see things as they really are without all our judgments, prejudices, ideas, likes, dislikes. I mean, instantly it comes. You see anything, and you never see the thing in itself. All we see is our version of it, our commentary. Because the mind is in the past, or it's in the future, planning, daydreaming, fantasizing, creating what it wants to do in the next moment, or the next year, or the next lifetime. But the ego, our sense of self, is very comfortable in the past and the future. It cannot live in the naked present. And so we don't stay present, where the mind, anybody who's tried to practice mindfulness sees very quickly how comfortable our ego-drawn mind is in the past and the future, and how absolutely it cannot bear being present. With the only time we really have is now, right? The rest is just mental fabrication. So this idea of who we really are is a very serious one. We'll go into it later. But nonetheless, despite the fact that the ego is what blocks us, our idea that there is an ego, which actually, when we analyze it, we see this is just a fabrication of our conventional mind. Nonetheless, in the meantime, who is walking the path? Who wants to tame their mind? Who wants to meditate? Who wants to, be a better person? Who wants to cultivate being more kind? It's the ego. And so therefore, although the whole spiritual path is designed to gradually dissolve our sense of self in order to open up to a much vaster, deeper level of awareness, which is our true nature and is non-dualistic. Who is doing that at the beginning has to be our sense of self. Right? Because our unborn awareness doesn't need to do any of those things. Our unborn awareness, by its very nature, is the culmination of wisdom and compassion. That's its nature. That's who we really are. But in order for us to get there, we have to use whatever we have. And that happens to be mostly our sense of self. I want to improve my mind. I want to tame my mind. Who is the I wanting to tame the mind? So it's this paradox, is what I'm saying. I mean, if we say, okay, look, there is the supreme understanding is to realize the meaning of selflessness, right? Okay, so I'm going to drop myself. That's lovely. Who is dropping themselves? The ego. It doesn't happen. Right? So in the beginning, the first step really, it seems to me, is to develop a sense of self which is a good, helpful sense of self. A sense of I which wants to walk the path and is therefore a happy, balanced sense of self. This, I think, is why the Buddha, when he taught loving kindness and compassion and so forth, you start with yourself. Well, you don't have to send loving kindness and compassion to the nature of the mind. You have to send loving kindness and compassion to who we think we are at this particular point, so that we become friends with ourselves. And then our sense of self has courage to walk the path towards its own dissolution. Do you understand? Does that make sense? So therefore we have to be friends with ourselves first. We cannot destroy our ego by beating ourselves up. what we have to do is heal ourselves, befriend ourselves, encourage ourselves to walk the path. And then gradually, naturally, as we become healed and balanced inwardly, psychologically, our obsession with ourselves begins to loosen. Oh, other people are more important. Sometimes I say it's like if we have a limb, like an arm, which is injured, then we have to protect it. We're always thinking about it, worrying that someone's going to hit us, or we can't use it much because it's injured. We're always, you know, thinking about my poor hurting arm, and so all our thoughts are concerned with our arm, even though the rest of the body might be perfectly healthy, right? We're obsessing about the injured limb. But as our arm or whatever heals, then not only is it very useful, but we're not thinking about it. How many of you are sitting there thinking about your arm? And if somebody hits it, wow, and then you've forgotten it, right? So it's like that with the ego. If our ego is in pain, if our ego is not healthy, if we are not friendly towards ourselves, kind towards ourselves, not self-indulgent, but nonetheless at peace within ourselves, if when that happens, then other people are more important. But as long as we are psychologically in pain, we're always thinking me, 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 me. People who have psychological problems are always obsessed with themselves and their own problems, and they're not interested in other people's problems. Who cares about your problems? It's me. That's why, as I always say, despite everything, the psychotherapists and psychologists are so popular. You know, you go there, you lie down, and you talk about me, 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 me. My childhood, my difficulties with my parents, the fact that nobody loves me, how difficult everything is, da-da-da, da-da-da. You spend hours talking about yourself, and then you give them money for listening. But if one is at ease with oneself, if one is really in balance with oneself, one isn't thinking about oneself very much. Other people's happiness is what counts, because one isn't hurting inside. So first step is a balanced, healthy sense of self. Because if our sense of self is healthy and balanced, we are no longer obsessed with ourselves, and the well-being of others becomes more important. Plus, we can walk on the path, and we can encourage ourselves and believe in ourselves. Because it's also very important on the spiritual path to have the confidence that we can walk it. So, in the process for dissolving and gaining genuine wisdom and insight into no-self, we have to start, as the Buddha obviously intended, because this is how he started it, with the shamatha practice to make the mind peaceful and attentive and balanced. You do shamatha first. And you cannot do deep shamatha until the mind is in balance. And when that happens, when the mind is very healthy and whole, then one goes on to insight of vipassana meditation and starts to dissect the mind and dissect our sense of self. But we cannot do that until our sense of self is whole and healthy. And we can see this from the levels that we go through. You know, we have to start where we are. and then gradually advance. And it's very important that we have that sense of well-being within ourselves, which then allows us to get over ourselves and really genuinely extend love and compassion to other beings. Because within we feel healthy. So this, of course, you know, this understanding that we are not who we really think we are is the first step, you know. But as I say, just saying, oh, there is no ego doesn't really help. We have to understand what that really means, and that is a gradual process. And it happens, I would say, naturally, as we begin to inwardly integrate. It's not something from the intellectual understanding, it's a very deep inner experience. So then, right, that's the ultimate, right? We have to realize the meaning of selflessness. What does it really mean? We are not who we think we are. That's what it really means. We're so much greater than who we think we are. This is the tragedy. Why, when wisdom, understanding of the real situation grows, along with it grows great compassion. Because we recognize our, you know, what incredible potential we have. And yet, what do we do with it? And so how sad. From, you know, this point of view, you know, we are innately Buddhas. And we just think we're suffering sentient beings. Isn't that sad? So then we start again. Right, that's the ultimate view. Now, what do we do about that? The supreme spiritual discipline is to tame one's own mind. So the Tibetan said Jetsunma. Sin is a nice word. It comes in the word Jetsun, like Jetsun Milarepa and so forth. The Tsun, it means something noble, fine, pure, disciplined. It has all these connotations, the word Tsun. And in Tibetan, in the actual books, nuns are called Jetsunma, ma being the female, of course. So it gets, when you talk about a nun in the literature, they call them Jetsunma, which gives the idea of somebody disciplined, pure, noble, fine, something very nice. And so recently, I don't know, in Tibetan colloquial, then normally nuns are called ane, which means an aunt, and where the monks are called kusho, which means venerable sir, nuns are called auntie. So it has for some time now been recognized that this maybe is not such a good idea. And especially as nuns nowadays, the new breed of nuns are much more educated, disciplined, living in very good nunneries, and are very different from the old style nuns who normally were denied any kind of education. So it's not appropriate anymore just to call them auntie. And so therefore there's been a lot of discussion what to call them instead. And sometimes nowadays they're called chola, but it doesn't go with the name. It sounds a little strange. It's a nice way to address somebody, but not as a name. And so then we said, well, how about calling them Jetsunma? That's how it is in the books, so we'll call them Jetsunma. And so the head of my tradition, the Gyalwang Drogpa, he said, yes, we're all going to call them Jetsunma from now on. And then the Karmapa also started calling them Jetsunma when he talks. And so now I announced to our nuns that from now on they were not to be called Ani, they were going to be called Jetsunma. And I thought that they would all just giggle and throw their eyes in the air. But instead, to my great surprise, they all cheered and applauded. And said that there was a 5 rupee fine on anyone who said "ani" by mistake. So now we're all Sunmala. And so it's this word Sun. Sun, which has, here is translated spiritual discipline. It means, as I say, somebody disciplined, noble, fine, pure, all these ideas at the same time. This idea of Tsun, being Tsun. The supreme spiritual discipline is to tame one's own mind. So, I mean, from the time of the Buddha onwards, I mean, he described our ordinary mind as the monkey mind. And, of course, it doesn't mean these nice, quiet, dejected monkeys living in zoos. It means monkeys in the wild. And if you've ever been anywhere where there were monkeys in the wild, you know what the Buddha was talking about. Monkeys in the wild are extremely active. They're extremely jumping here, there. They're endlessly searching for food. They're fighting each other and copulating all over the place, and in general wreaking ruin. I mean, anybody who has monkeys in their area have a hard time. Because monkeys are very destructive, and they are really a big problem, and endlessly restless. So the monkey mind is the mind that's always reaching out, grasping, fighting, running around, endlessly stirred up, always looking for an opportunity, and in general causing havoc wherever they are. And so this monkey mind, before we can train it, needs to be tamed. So this question of how to quieten down the mind, and as I say, make the mind want to be trained. Because otherwise, when we sit down and we try to meditate, the mind, as everyone knows, you know, at this point we recognize there's a problem. Normally, you know, in everyday life, we're following the mind so completely that we're not even conscious there's a problem. We think, oh, well, you know, mind's a mind, but my mind's pretty okay. And then we try to meditate. And we recognize that there is actually a dire problem, because the mind is totally out of control. Who is in charge? We think this is my mind. It's not my mind. It's just mine going off on its own, and the poor little ego running behind it. And anybody who has tried to meditate, just very simple, focusing on the breath, isn't that easy? Right? Right, we're all going to sit nicely and breathe, and then we are going to know we are breathing, right? We are breathing in, then we breathe out, then we breathe in, and then you know, and then 5 minutes later, we remember, oh yes, breathing in and breathing out. And we recognize, you know, whoever is in charge of the brain, it ain't me. And this is terrifying, because we live in our mind. Where else can we live? And yet our mind is completely out of control, and it's filled with thoughts and feelings and ideas and all this stuff churning away. which is totally irrelevant, which we don't want, which we don't like, which makes us feel very, not at peace, and which apparently we have no control over. And we can't escape. We've got it with us day and night. So the good thing about trying to do this just very basic shamatha meditation is that it at least alerts us to the problem. As I say, most people, they just follow their mind, and so although they're not happy, they don't recognize that the problem is inside ourselves, not outside ourselves. So we blame everybody outside. We blame our families, our partners, our colleagues, our bosses. We blame our neighbors. We blame whoever we meet in the course of the day. We blame the government. We blame everything else. But, the Lord of Lies is within us. As they say, change the mind, change the world. Definitely change our lives. So therefore, step number one is to recognize that we all have this very, very big problem sitting right in the midst of us. But step number two is to recognize that we can do something about it. The good thing is that we don't have to change the government. The good thing is that if we change ourselves, everything changes. Really, this is really actually wonderful news, because we always think if other people changed, things would be so much better, but it's not them, it's us. And since we cannot change other people, this is good news, because, no, we cannot change others, but we can change ourselves. And so step number one is to learn how to tame the mind. Taming the mind here means getting the mind to be more quiet and more attentive, more centered. And so the first step in Buddhist mind training is intended for that. Just simply to get the mind to become more centered, more conscious, more quiet, attention. And all of us can do this. It's like any skill, it takes practice. Buddhists are always talking about practice. And that's exactly what it is. It's like any skill. If we want to be a musician, if we want to be a sports person, if we want to learn anything, any skill, first we have to practice. Over and over and over and over and over until we become proficient. I mean, nowadays there's a lot of talk about meditation being effortless, but truthfully, it takes a lot of effort to become effortless. I mean, like if you see a great musician or a great sports person and the way they perform, it seems like it's just natural. But that's because of the tens of thousands of hours that they've gone over the same thing again and again and again and again and again until finally it just becomes spontaneous. But it doesn't come spontaneous overnight. It takes a lot of work. But the most important thing we could possibly do for ourselves and others, not just in this lifetime, but for all our future lifetimes, is to tame our mind. And then great happiness. Because all our suffering is caused by our mind. Again, we blame outside causes. But if our mind was well tamed, no matter what happened to us, it would not disturb the genuine inner joy of our minds. The reason why we suffer is not out there. The reason we suffer is in here. And so this is also the solution. Each one of us has to use our life, our daily life, as the way, as the path to integrating the Dharma so completely that we become what we are striving for. So to tame the mind is the first really, I mean, if we tame the mind, everything resolves. The mind is the big problem, always. The mind here also means the heart, of course. In Asian language, the word for the heart and the mind are synonymous. It doesn't just mean the intellectual mind. It also means our emotions, our feelings, and the deeper level of our being, not just the surface thinking mind. But the good thing is that we can do this. We can do this. But we have to really commit to doing it because it's not going to be automatic. It's going against the current. So to tame the mind means to cultivate more, to cultivate the shamatha meditations of keeping the mind more calm and more one-pointed, along with cultivating more mindfulness and awareness in daily life so that we are centered and that we're not endlessly distracted, so that we are really as much as possible present. When we are present, then everything is poised, and we are able to deal skillfully with whatever happens to us in our daily lives. That time the mind feels very open and spacious and present, and in that way very pacified and tamed, not in the sense of being dull, but in the sense of being very awake and alive and focused. Normally we're half asleep, even when we think that we are most awake. But this is when we really start to wake up, and then we are in control of the situation instead of being controlled by everything. So this, the supreme great quality is altruism. Hold on, Yuntenji Chok, Pensim, Chewa. So it says that the mind which wishes to benefit others, in Tibetan, the Pensem Chewa. It means a mind which, why are we doing all of this? It is not just to make ourselves feel better, but because we recognize that just as I would like to be happy and not suffer, all beings want to be happy and not suffer. And we are deeply interconnected with all beings. And in the Tibetan tradition, they make a big thing out of how, because we have had so many rebirths in samsara, therefore at some point or other, everybody has been our mother. And in Asia, people actually like their mothers and feel grateful to them, recognizing that if it wasn't for their mother, they wouldn't be here. And that, you know, even when we were really little babies and, you know, mostly we were just feeding and you know, defecating with no conversation whatsoever and totally self-absorbed, mother didn't throw us out. She loved us, she cherished us, she took care of us. Without her, how would we have existed? And so our gratitude towards our mother is unfathomable. Without her, we wouldn't be here. So therefore, if we think how we would be so sad if our mother was suffering, and how much we want for our mother to be happy and well, and that in the unfathomable spaces of time of being reborn and re-died and reborn and re-died, all beings have been connected with us like our mother, then we, just as we wish this mother in this lifetime to be happy, we want all beings to be happy. And so therefore that sense of altruism, was ist das? Okay. That sense of wishing other people, that warmth of heart, it's very important on our practice not to get too self-absorbed in all our being very aware and taming our minds and, being very conscious and mindful and so forth, that we don't end up doing exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do. And becoming more obsessed with ourselves than ever. It's very important that this process opens our heart to the interconnection with all beings and the genuine wish for their happiness. That, the more we focus only on our happiness, the more miserable we're going to be. And the more we focus on making other people happy, the more inner relief and openness we feel. And then we discover we are happy because we're trying to make others happy, everybody. And when they're happy, we're happy. So this underlying wish for the well-being of others is very, very important. It's also there in the sense of why are we on a spiritual path? And from the Mahayana point of view, the reason we are on the path is because we recognize that we are trapped in the prison house of samsara, and all beings are likewise trapped. So we have to get the key to get out so that we can open the doors wide to allow everyone else out. That's the reason. It's not that we get out of prison and say, well, I got out of prison, too bad, guys. Keep trying, bye. The only real reason to open the doors wide is so that everyone else can also leave. So therefore, their happiness, their joy, is our primary interest. How can we bring joy to all these other beings? How can we help? So the underlying motivation is to benefit all other beings, not just human beings, all beings. All beings want to be happy. No beings want to suffer. And so that is the undercurrent. Because our minds are so out of control, because we are so untamed, even without intending it, we cause so many problems for other people. So, let's try to deal with that. Let's try to live our life, not just something, way off in the future, sometime or other when I'm enlightened, sitting on the lotus radiating lights. It's not that. It's right now, moment to moment to moment to moment to moment, every single being that we meet wishes happiness, doesn't want suffering. So in that moment, how can we help? Isn't it? So that always whatever we are saying, whatever we are doing, and really backed by our internal motivation, our mental heart involvement, we are thinking of the well-being of others. It's very important, because otherwise people tend to, you know, with the best intentions, get very introverted. I mean, when you're in retreat, just doing your practice, you have to be introverted, that's the point. But when we are in society, and even when we are in meditation retreat, still our underlying motivation should be to wake up in order to awaken others. But nonetheless, when we are in society, definitely our very important motivation is, as much as possible, to help relieve others of their suffering and help create some kind of inner joy, just even in one moment of meeting them, not to create problems for anybody. And if people do bad things, to really, you know, feel great compassion for them, rather than get upset and irritated and you know, make more negativities. The world is already so full of negativity. We don't need to create more. It's very important to emanate, you know, something very positive. Sitting in trains and buses, do, you know, metta meditation. Fill the whole carriage with light. Imagine that all these beings, everyone's sitting there, everybody with their problems, their anxieties, their troubles. May they be well and happy. May they be free from suffering. And imagine that all this light comes out and fills them, and all their anxieties and worries and troubles and problems dissolve, and their inner joy arises. Just visualize that. Because the world is surrounded by this very heavy pollution of negative thinking. We need to have some positive thinking. Isn't that? You know, people say, I have no time to practice. Come on. We've got infinite. As long as we are awake and breathing, we can practice. It doesn't take time. It just takes the ability to remember to do that and prioritize. Instead of wasting our time looking and reading all these useless things in these utterly useless newspapers, you know, sit and do some loving kindness meditation. Or read a Dharma book. Okay. The supreme oral instruction is to observe the mind at all times. Now, any of you who went to my talk last night will know exactly what we're talking about here. Really, the mind is the center of our universe, so to say. And so the supreme teaching is to be aware of the mind-heart. In the Tibetan tradition, you know, the Buddha, he taught 4 levels of mindfulness, starting with the body, and then the feelings, and the mind, and then the mental phenomena. And in the Tibetan tradition, the emphasis is always on observing the mind, because we tend to, as we were talking in the beginning, the mind is rushing on like a raging river. And normally we are swept along by the mind. We are just, you know, like a river in full spate. We're right in the middle of it all, and we're rushing along. And because we are going in the way that the river is going, we're not even conscious of how utterly out of control this situation is, because we're just swept along by it all. And so what we are trying to do is step out of the river, stand on the bank, and watch the river going by without being swept along. So we are cultivating, first of all, another level of consciousness. It's not the ultimate nature of the mind, but it is a very important quality of our mind, which is sometimes called mindfulness or awareness. And it's the ability to be conscious of the thinking process without being swept along by it. So if we think of our surface mind, our ordinary conceptual thinking mind, as like our gross mind, then the ability to observe that is a subtle mind. And we all have this ability. But normally we're not conscious that we are conscious. We are swept along by our conventional mind, which is ruled by the ego. And so that's why this is a very, very supreme oral instruction, is step out from the thinking mind. Doesn't mean stop thinking. The thinking mind, the ability to think is a very, very precious ability. We're not trying to stop thought. There's nothing wrong with thinking. We're not trying to blank out. What we are trying to do is be aware of that thinking, and in that way we are not controlled by that thinking. Right? So the thinking is going on, but there is something else, a space in which there is the awareness of the thoughts, and then when we are not the thoughts, we are just aware of the thoughts, then we also can discriminate what thoughts are helpful, what thoughts are not helpful. What feelings are useful, what feelings are not useful. We can decide how we want the mind, what direction we want the mind to go in, what we want to fill, the contents. We then begin to come in charge of that and more aware, more conscious of what's actually going on in the mind in this moment, instead of just being swept along by it. So this is, is a very crucial point. And it's because also it's something which, once we learn how to do that, we can do at all times. So this is why he says, observe the mind at all times. So as I said last night, just to say to people, okay, observe the mind at all times. So it is more skillful to start in small stages. So we can make a commitment. I mean, all we have to do is look and see what's going on in the mind in this moment. Not judging it, just seeing what's in this moment, what am I thinking? That's all. It's not anything esoteric. That we can make a commitment with ourselves that every hour we will pause for a few seconds and look at the mind. Right? I mean, it's very simple. We can even have one of those apps on our smartphones which go ding, and you don't have to. You just okay until the mind takes over again, and then next time, and then next time. And then as we begin to understand, we can do it every half hour, every quarter of an hour. And what happens is that as we begin to understand how to do this, it only takes a few seconds. As we begin to understand how to do this, the mind of itself gains strength. And it begins to, especially in very trying situations, suddenly clicks in to being suddenly very clear and aware, without us having to give it any input. Naturally, suddenly, we suddenly are completely present. And then the ability to stay longer in that state of awareness, it begins to strengthen like any muscle, right? Once you start using it, it gains its own momentum. So gradually, we begin to find it easier and easier to bring ourselves back into the present, to become more conscious of what's happening inside us in that moment, until finally it all links up and we observe the mind at all times. In the Tibetan tradition, that also includes during sleep. They have a lot of meditations for dreaming and for going into deep sleep to keep maintaining that essential awareness going 24 hours. But we start where we are with something very simple, which is just that during the day, we have set times in which we just pause. Just for a few seconds to bring ourselves back into the present moment. In this moment, what is the mind doing? In this moment, what's the body doing? It's also a mini holiday for the mind. You know? For a moment, the mind de-stresses. It just relaxes and it just is quietly present. No judgments, just knowing. We have to, this quality of knowing is synonymous with waking up. Because normally we think that we are awake, but from the point of view of a really awake mind, we're still we're zombies, really. I mean, the word bodhi, which is translated as enlightened, really means to wake up. Buddha means someone who's awake. So what we're trying to do is wake up, to make the mind more clear, more open, more spacious, more present. And so we have to use our daily life to do this. It's not enough when we're sitting on our cushion. Even if we meditate for an hour a day, what are we doing with the other 23 hours? We have to integrate these practices into our daily life. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to maintain that transformation. But the good news is that we can do that. But we have to determine to do that. Because everything is going in the opposite direction towards mindlessness. And so therefore to become more aware, more mindful, more present is a challenge. Because everything we are doing nowadays, all those, computer games and phones and everything, it's all for us to lose our mind. And so it's really, well, as he himself says, you have to be in disharmony. We're going in the opposite direction. The supreme remedy is to know that nothing has self-nature. Hold on, Nyempo Chok. Yes, okay. So the thing is, the remedy against what? Well, remedy against all our negative emotions, our greed and our aversion and jealousies and prides and all our attachments and so forth. The real remedy of all that is to recognize that all these things which we regard as being so solid, so self-existent from their own side, and therefore desirable or undesirable to me, to my ego, in their essential nature have no existence from their own side. This, of course, is part of Buddhist philosophy, that the mind, the unenlightened mind, solidifies everything. It reifies everything, makes everything into a thing. Starting with ourselves, the sense that we are self-existent, solid, enduring, real me, relating to all those other solid, real, existing others, including people and things. And as long as we see these things as real, self-existent, from their own side, independent, then an independent, self-existent I is going to make a relationship with self-existent, independent others, either people or things. So therefore, the real remedy, the real antidote to all of that is to understand, to actually have a direct realization that the way we perceive things through our senses and through our brain is not how they actually exist in reality, that we are constantly creating our own, basically our own reality. So this in Buddhist practice is dealt with first on an intellectual level through philosophical analysis, especially in the Madhyamika or middle way school, recognizing that nothing from its own side is independent. We all think that everything exists how it is, but when we look for the thing in itself, we never can find it. I mean, for example, these glasses, if I say, what are these? You'll say, oh, they're glasses. And then when we ask, well, which part is the glasses? Is that the glass? And you'll say, no, that's the lens. Well, how about that? Well, no, that's the frame. No, that's this. You keep analyzing it down. And then also beyond that, you know, you go down, well, what is the thing in itself? You know, you get down to cells, and then you get to protons and neutrons. And then you go beyond that to subatomic quantum physics, and we never can find the thing in itself which we can say exists on its own without being in interdependence with everything else, to create something which we will then label as. So if one does that for a long enough time, things begin to lose their sense of solidity, their sense of substance, because we recognize that everything can only exist in interdependence with everything else. You can never find a thing in itself from its own side. This is why, as I say, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is so fascinated by quantum physics. It's because they have come to the same conclusion, which was, come to several thousand years ago by meditators and philosophers. And of course, quantum physicists are fascinated that the Buddhists got there first. There is this dialogue in which this quantum physicist said to the Dalai Lama, well, how could you have recognized that nothing has self-existence from its own side and arises in interdependence when you don't have the machines? And His Holiness said, well, how could you have realized that nothing has interdependence and it all arises, so forth, without actually meditating? So both sides came to exactly the same conclusion, and that's why His Holiness holds all these mind science get-togethers to exchange views, because they have discovered from very, very different sources that, in fact, this is exactly how it is. So it's not enough intellectually to understand this. I mean, quantum physicists know this intellectually, but it doesn't mean that they don't get angry, they don't get depressed, they don't get, desire and aversion and so forth, even though they know that ultimately there is no independent existence, until we actually experience it within ourselves. But nonetheless, intellectually, to think about this helps to slowly release the habit of the mind of grasping at things or rejecting things as if they had independent existence. It's like if we saw a movie, if we went to the cinema, and then, in the cinema there's the screen and then there's this drama happening. And, if it's well done, then we are totally gripped. If it's a sort of sad, smoochy romance, everybody, oh. And if it's a drama, everybody's heart's beating. And if it's a, I don't know, action movie, but we know it's just a film. We know it's just a movie. I mean, even if the heroine dies in the last act, but, we don't go home and put a bullet through our brain. We know it's just a movie. Well done, well acted, nice. But we don't believe it. So we can enjoy it, participate in it, but we don't believe it. So likewise, in our mind, if you go into a cinema and you look behind, what's actually happening? You've got the screen, but behind there are these little transparent frames which are moving incredibly rapidly. And behind that is light, which is shining through these little transparent frames and projects out. And so if we look at the mind, this is exactly what we see. We have these little transparent frames of thought moments which are going so fast. And behind that, we have the clear light nature of the mind, the clear light nature of our unborn primordial awareness, which is shining through those little thought moments and projecting our whole outer reality. So, if we recognize that on a very deep level, this is really all just our projection, then we can enjoy it. But at the depths of our being, we don't really believe it. Then that is the antidote, because we don't have to grasp, we don't have to push away. Things arise as they arise. So when things are there, we can enjoy them, but we don't have to grasp at them. Things are difficult, we don't need to go there, but we don't have to get angry, upset, furious, depressed. Things are as they are. Then we can hold everything very gently, very lightly, and appreciate it and have fun if we need, but without that grasping quality of the mind, which the Buddha said is the cause of our suffering. We think that the tighter we hold on, the more secure we will be, the more we will be safe. And we don't understand that the more we grasp, the more we suffer and the more insecure we are. Because when inevitably we have to let go, then we will suffer. The Buddha didn't say that it was our anger that caused us suffering. He said it was the grasping, clinging mind. And if we really analyze that, we see that's really true. We cause so much of our own suffering because we can't let go. Letting go doesn't mean that you discard everything, but it means you hold it gently. And we can appreciate it while it's there, but if it's gone, we can accept it, you know, because we're not. So therefore, this antidote or remedy is to know that we cannot grasp because nothing has any self-nature. We don't, other things don't, other people don't. So we're grasping at rainbows. And we suffer. And we cause suffering. Look at relationships. Everybody wants it to be wonderful and work out, and you know, you go into relationships with the idea it's going to bring happiness all around, and look. We cause so much suffering to ourselves and to others with the intention of bringing, you know, well-being. But it's not well-being because our whole perception is distorted. We just don't see. This is why compassion arises. It's not just compassion for sick little puppies. It's this existential compassion. Because we recognize how screwed up we all are. Looking for inner satisfaction and peace. And just so completely losing the plot the whole time. Because we just don't see, and we don't see anywhere, you know? I mean, look around the world. What a mess we're making. We're supposed to be so clever. We're so intelligent. We have so many degrees. How can we be so stupid? Really, you know, we have to look in our own heart. Where have we gone wrong? I'm not trying to depress everybody. I'm trying to make everybody happy, but we have to ask these questions, you know, because somehow the world isn't going, you know, with all this intelligence that we have, yet somehow we have, you know, we're not only for human beings, but for all the animals and all the plants, the whole planet. We are so completely messed up. We're like a cancer. And yet, we are intrinsically Buddhists. So where have we gone wrong? And each one of us has that responsibility to try to reverse that as much as possible. Okay, so then he says, the supreme conduct is to be in disharmony with the world. I love him. Of course, he doesn't mean that we have to quarrel with all our neighbors and generally make a big nuisance of ourselves. But what he does mean, and it's obvious, is that where is society going? What are the values which society is training us to appreciate that we are not going with, right? I mean, somebody was talking the other day about going with the flow, and so we're going against the flow, right? Because society says the more you get, the happier you will be, and Dharma says the more you can let go, the freer you will be. You know, society says, this is the me generation. I have to take care of me, me, me. Dharma says, you know, the self is an illusion anyway. Look to making all other beings happy. That's the really important thing. If you want to be happy, make others happy. and so forth. So it's not about cultivating our sense of identity, it's about loosening our sense so that we can be, our minds can be more, also not so, you know, society is going towards being less and less attentive, our attention span is getting smaller and smaller. I read recently that the average attention span of a child in America nowadays is 4 seconds. I mean, I think that's terrifying. Four seconds. And then, you know, it has to get a new image, a new image, a new image, the whole time. You see it when you look at things nowadays. Everything's speeding up, speeding up, speeding up. So we are trying to slow down, extend our attention, be able to focus longer on a single point, be able to really immerse the mind in the present moment, be more conscious, less distracted, think of others beyond ourselves, learn the joy of giving instead of always getting, the ability to let go instead of grasping, and so forth. In other words, we are going against the trend. We are living in disharmony with the world. The Buddha said, and this was 2,600 years ago, the Buddha said, that anyone who practices the Dharma is like a fish swimming upstream when the rest of the shoal is swimming downstream. So even then, someone who was sincerely practicing the spiritual path was something outside of the general trend of society, which is going all together downstream to the swamps. We're trying to swim upstream to the fresh springs. And so it's an effort, because, you know, we are going against the stream. And it takes a lot of you know, real conviction to do that, because everybody is going the other direction. And this is also why it is very important to have a sangha. A sangha means a community, a spiritual community. The Buddha, right from the start, said that the way for the Dharma to flourish was to cultivate the fourfold sangha. They've ordained monks, ordained nuns, laymen, lay women, that all of these sections have to study and practice and propagate the Dharma and support each other. And this was never more so than in the West, because in Asia, if you're in a Buddhist country, then even though most of the people don't know much about Dharma, they have basic Dharma values. I mean, they don't know much about the actual doctrine, but they do know. It's surprisingly how much they do know about the underlying assumptions and the basic good values in Buddhism. You know, so everyone knows it's important to keep ethical conduct, to be generous, to try to be patient, have loving kindness, and so forth. They all know that. But in the West, people don't know that. And so their value system is often completely contradictory to a Dharma life well lived. And so, you know, getting more and more and more is a sign of success, rather than letting go of more and more, or at least not being attached to what we have. So it's very important that therefore we create and become for each other, you know, a good friend. A good friend, a kalyana mitra, means somebody who has like spiritual values and really encourages us. Even whether they're Buddhist or not Buddhist is not so important. What is important is that we have the good friendship of people who share our basic value system, so that we are supporting each other in that way, that we all agree, you know, that these things are important, other things are not so important, and that way we don't feel so alone and so isolated and so peculiar, because we recognize we know lots of really nice people, and they think more or less the way I think, so I can't be that weird. And it's important. And the Buddha recognized this right from the start. He put a lot of emphasis on the Sangha and harmony within the Sangha, even though that Sangha might be inwardly in disharmony with the world. In other words, that whatever values we are given in our media, for example, we should examine. I mean, is this really what I believe? Is this really, you know, what? And if it is good, then wonderful. And if it is not good, then we have to have the ability to say, no, I don't believe that. That's not the direction I want to go in. And so therefore it helps to have friends who likewise, you know, can support us in this and encourage us to go on the path we need to go on. Even when outwardly it might seem it's going in the opposite direction to where society tells us we need to travel. So therefore, he says, the supreme conduct, the supreme way of acting is to be in disharmony with the world. In other words, that we put our efforts in a very different direction to the way that, you know, society is telling us we need to make our efforts. It's not towards accumulating more and more goods. It's towards learning how to, you know, where he's going to go into it now, you know, how to live in the world ethically, generously, patiently, and get our real inner satisfaction from sharing and being in, having our mind focused on goals far beyond mere ego gratification. So in this way, he's talking about being in disharmony. As I say, it doesn't mean that we just have to flaunt what we are doing or you know, quarrel with all our neighbors. But it does mean that inwardly, our compass is set in a different direction. And if it's not, then why isn't it? So then the supreme accomplishment is a continuous decrease of disturbing emotions. This is a nice one in Tibetan. It's a bit missed in English. The word for accomplishment here is the word siddhi. And siddhi means, it means accomplishment, but by the 11th century, it mostly meant magical accomplishment. So in the tantric tradition, you have the Mahasiddhas, who are all these kind of mad yogi types who could fly and walk on water and leave their handprint in rock, and like Milarepa. Milarepa was a siddha, right? He had many siddhis. And even today in India, you have people like Sai Baba and others, they are siddhas. And so again, it means all these kind of psychic powers and clairvoyance and so forth. And so by the 11th century, when a teacher came to Tibet, the sign of your being somebody worth something was how many psychic powers you had, which was very dangerous. Because people can be very psychic and completely screwed up, as any of you who've known psychics will know. It is not a sign of spiritual advancement. Now, some great practitioners likewise get many psychic phenomena, clairvoyance and so forth. Others get none. Some psychics are spiritually advanced, some are totally not. So the fact that one has siddhis in itself is not a criteria for your spiritual advancement. And in fact, there is, I'm thinking now, there is a story somewhere in one of the stories, I think of Milarepa, where one of his students, to show how well he's getting on, starts flying backwards and forwards in front of Milarepa's cave. And Milarepa says, yes, I can see you have certain experience. Now why don't you go away and get some realizations? So Milarepa knew. But nonetheless, people are very, very impressed by people who manifest all these psychic phenomena and all these, higher clairvoyant attainments, like putting your footprint in rocks. I don't know, in Tibet and everywhere there are endless rocks with footprints and handprints and other prints. And I mean, that's good, I mean, it's nice, but it doesn't mean that it's a sign per se of spiritual advancement. This is the point. So this is very cute, you see, because this was the time when all the lamas were manifesting incredible psychic phenomena. And so Atisha says, the supreme siddhi is a continuous decrease of our disturbing emotions. Plump, down, forget flying around and walking on water. Are you less angry, less greedy, less jealous, less prideful, or not? In another place, Atisha says, even if you have, for example, were doing a meditation retreat for a year, when you come out, the question to be asked is not how many, incredible phenomena one recognized and realized and all the lights and, insights and so forth. He said the question you ask is, have your disturbing, your klesha, your afflictive emotions, anger, greed, pride, jealousy, and so forth, have they decreased, stayed the same, or increased? For example, some people after doing a lot of meditation become more sensitive, more irritable, more unable to stand other people, or they become prideful, and so forth. In which case, he said it was a waste of time. The only criteria that you can think that retreat actually was helpful was if we recognize that our afflictive emotions, our greed and anger and so forth, have declined. That in situations where normally we would have been upset and irritated, we are not. Our interest in grasping and getting has decreased. Our sense of self and me has also abated, and so forth. If we feel that, yes, we are much more peaceful inside, our minds are much more spacious, we are not getting all emotionally involved the whole time, then we know, yes, the practice is working. But if not, if we're just the same, or even worse, then we're in trouble. And so this is basically the same thing in a sense that don't think about, that the signs that you can do all these magical things means anything. The real sign is if the mind is becoming tamed. Is our mind, because all these emotions depend on our ego. Therefore, if our ego is strong, we will have strong emotional reactions to whatever happens. You understand? They're obvious. Greed and grasping, anger and frustration, jealousy, pride, it's all me. So as our sense of I at the center of everything begins to relax and open and become more transparent, then all these things don't affect us. We just don't feel upset or greedy or prideful or any of that. It just doesn't come into the mind. The mind is at peace. And so that is a sign that the ego is dissolving, which is the only criteria we need for success in our practice. Yeah, actually something's moving. Obvious. So we'll just do the next one, and then I have a little announcement, because it goes on. So the supreme sign of these siddhis, of this accomplishment, is a continuous decrease of our wishes and wants. Because again, it's all the same thing, right? I mean, as the ego begins to become, as I say, more transparent, less solid and insistent, then, the inner satisfaction is so great. And the inner sense of joy and awakeness, alertness, presence is so strong that, what do we want? We don't need anything. It just, while the ego is very strong, it's very insistent. The Buddha said that greed and our grasping, wanting mind is like drinking salty water. That the more we drink, the more thirsty we become. It never can be quenched. As we see in our present day society, where everybody has so much, and still we are totally unsatisfied. Still we are thinking, if only I had this, oh, if only, if only, if only. And it never will finish. I mean, as you know, nowadays they have firms in America who go into people's homes to help them get rid of things. Because people, now their homes are so jam-packed, they can't move. But they can't let go. So they actually have people trained to go into people's homes and tell them what they don't need and cut it out. I mean, it's true. Especially online, people get obsessed. Oh, look, there's a bargain, I must have it. It arrives and they think, what do I want this for? I've got 12 of them already. And so this insatiability however much we have, it's never enough. So, therefore, the actual sign that we have really begun to understand and think our practice really is working is that less and less do we want more and more. We are content. Contentment, appreciation. We already have so much. Why do we need more? And a sense of inner satisfaction. You know, look how much we already have. It's enough. When that sense comes really into our heart, we look at all these things, and they're very nice, I don't want it. I mean, it's like walking through a shopping mall. You know, it's full of all these glittering things. Oh, they're very pretty. Couldn't care less. Who needs it? Just, you know, clogging up the space. Then, when that feeling is just naturally there, yeah, it's all very nice, I don't want it at all. Then you feel that, yeah, something inside is releasing, is letting go. And we're content. We have so much. What more do we need? That, as I say, is for Atisha is a sign that really the Dharma is taking genuine root in our mind and our hearts. And our being is moving in the genuine direction of the Dharma, that we are in harmony with the Dharma, which means we are in disharmony with worldly aims and ambitions. Doesn't mean if you've got a lot that you can't have it. It's not, the things themselves are not the problem. This is very important to understand. Things themselves are not the problem. What is the problem is our grasping at these things. So some people can have so much but not grasp, and other people can have very little and be grasping very tightly. I mean, for this reason, I will finish here with this little story, which many of you will have heard before, but because the important thing is not to realize that the problem is not things out there, the problem is the grasping in the mind. That's the real problem. So one time in ancient India, there was this king, and you know, he had a big palace filled with all sorts of gorgeous things. But he was a very devout king, and he had a guru who was a great renunciate. And so the king was in all his silks and glory, and his guru had just a little, loincloth, and all he owned was a little simple wooden alms bowl. And one day they're in the garden, and the guru is giving teaching to the king. And meantime, the servants come racing up and saying, "Oh, Maharaj, your majesty, quickly, quickly come, the whole palace is in flames." And the king says, "Don't bother me, I am with my guru, learning Dharma. You go and deal with the palace." And meantime, the guru jumps up and says, "What do you mean? My begging bowl was in the palace." So this is the point. The point is not how much we have, but how attached we are to what we have. It's the attachment that's the problem. We can have nothing and be attached to that, or we can have everything and be totally unattached. Okay, so there are two things. Oh dear, what's this? regarding refuge. Can you please? Okay. So there are 2 points that I want to make here. One is that the proceeds from the talks this weekend will be dedicated to something called the Alliance for Non-Himalayan Nuns. For many years, I have dedicated myself to raising awareness and funds for nuns from the Himalayan regions, such as Tibet and Ladakh, Kinur, Spiti, Bhutan, Sikkim, Nepal, who until fairly recently were very overlooked in the system. As in most Buddhist countries, nuns are, as one Lama put it, the bottom of the basket. And so they likewise were very overlooked, especially when the Lamas first came into exile, and their main priority was to rebuild their monasteries and reestablish their traditions again, which they have done very magnificently. But at the same time, of course, the women tended to be a bit overlooked and neglected. And so in the last 20 years, many people, not just myself by any means, have been dedicated to setting up well-run nunneries where nuns can be studying and practicing. This year, for the first time, 21 nuns are going to take the Geshe-Ma degree, Geshe being like a Doctor of Divinity, and was never previously allowed for females. And now this year, for the first time, 21 nuns will receive this degree from His Holiness the Dalai Lama himself in the main temple. So this is a very historical event, as nuns themselves will become teachers. And in our nunnery, not only are the nuns practicing and studying, but our special joy is our 8 nuns who are in long-term retreat. They've finished about 7 years now. And they are training to become yoginis or Tokten Ma, because again, this lineage had been broken off and my Lama had asked me to reestablish it. So now the main yogis from our monastery are finally taking the nuns very seriously and teaching them the various practices and yogas in the Tibetan tradition, so that now in the future they themselves will become fully established yoginis and be able to teach others and hand on these very precious and profound traditions. So nuns are coming along quite well, actually. But what has been overlooked in this process are all those, actually hundreds of women who do not belong to the Himalayas, but have joined the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Both nuns from the West and nuns from other Asian countries, like from Taiwan and Vietnam and so forth, who have, instead of being ordained into the Mahayana traditions of their countries, have taken Tibetan teachers and joined the Tibetan order. So people imagine that all of these women are somehow supported by their teachers, by their lamas, or by the organizations which they are serving, but they are not. When people come to me and say, foreigners come and say, I would like to ordain, my first question, which is unbelievable, is, how are you going to support yourself? Because there is no support system for these women. They are out on their own. They are not only unsupported financially, but also psychologically often. They have no training. You can go to a Lama and say, Rinpoche, I want to be ordained, and he will say, wonderful, very meritorious. Buy some robes and come back, and then you come back and he gives you ordination, and that's wonderful. you know, I rejoice, goodbye. That's it. So many of these women who take ordination themselves are highly educated. Many of them had high positions in the professional life. Many of them, of course, most of them, because they come not when they're 4 years old, but when they're 40 or 50, have been in relationships, have, you know, many of them married and had children. And so they have a whole life history behind them of accomplishment. But this, again, is overlooked. There's no training. There's no encouragement. Even if they are given a Dharma center to run, because lamas like going around the world starting Dharma centers, but then they don't support them. You know, you meet these nuns, they are raising funds to pay their taxes and to pay their rent and their electricity bills. They're also giving all the teaching, plus they're trying to raise funds to invite the Lama. When the Lama comes, they raise funds and they give it back to the Lama again. Even people joining an organization which has a Western Sangha component, do not support that Sangha. In fact, often they have to pay to stay, which you would not find in a traditional monastery. So, you know, and they feel isolated. You know, you have one nun there, one nun over there, one nun over there. They're not a Sangha. They're not a community. They feel very isolated, very alone, struggling. Nobody appreciating them, everybody looking to the Lama, not noticing who's running the centers, not noticing who is doing all the work behind the scenes, for which they do not get paid. They might be spending all their day and nights organizing these Dharma centers, but they're not being paid for that. In fact, they have to pay often to stay. So we really thought this is not good enough. People are not aware. They're always thinking of supporting these Tibetans, but nobody thinks about what about their own Sangha? I mean, you go to Burma, the Burmese are supporting the Burmese Sangha. If you go to, you know, Thailand, they're supporting the Thai Sangha. The Tibetans are supporting their Tibetan Sangha. Who is supporting the Western Sangha? The Westerners in the Tibetan tradition are all supporting Tibetans. The Lamas don't even mention, well, look, thank you very much for all this money, here you are. The only Lama I ever knew who did that was when I was in Australia one time with this lovely Lama called Wandrak Rinpoche, who's the abbot of a yogini nunnery in Tibet called Gebcha. And we did a talk together in public. And then the offerings which were made, when he got them, he handed them to me and he said, this is for your Alliance for Non-Himalayan Nuns. And he was the only Lama I ever knew who did that. Normally they take them back. Not for their nunneries even. So, as a result, a group of us nuns, the first geshe, female geshe in all the world, was a German, Kokesang Wongmo, who had studied for 20 years in Dharamshala. And she became the first geshe ever, geshe Ma, in all of Tibetan history. So she is one of the board members for this Alliance of Non-Himalayan Nuns, and also another Dutch nun, called Tenzin Sangmo, who started a kind of nunnery and for females, non-Himalayan females of any kind, both lay and monastic, near Dharamshala. So, because there's nowhere for people to stay, you get ordained and then what? The monasteries don't want you. Where are you going to stay? Who's going to support you? So we decided that the first thing we need to do is to let people know that this situation is there, because these nuns are simply overlooked. Everybody assumes they're being taken care of, but they are not. When I was in Taiwan, Hong Kong, we met with this nun, this Chinese nun who had become in the Tibetan tradition. She had to still live in a home with her ex-husband because she had nowhere to live. And so, you know, it's a situation not only for Western, but Asian nuns also, and people are not aware that there is hundreds of women who have such potential, if only they were helped. They want to go on, you know, some kind of retreat. They can't afford it. They want to go for some teachings from some lama. They can't afford it. I mean, it's unbelievable. They've given up everything, everything. They've given up their position, they've given up their houses, they've given up their relationships, they've given up their profession, they've gone forth in faith. They've really renounced in a way that the Asians, these, you know, have usually not renounced because they've got nothing to renounce. But these have got something really which they did give up. And yet nothing is there for them. They're just completely overlooked or overworked. So it's not good enough. So therefore we have started this alliance for non-Himalayan nuns so that at least first that people should become aware that there is this situation and we do need help. And also to try to help some of these nuns come together and you know, even if it's only through cyberspace, to, you know, connect with each other and recognize they're not completely alone and that, you know, there is something behind to try to help them and support them. So this is a very important part. This is, for me now, my main concern is for them to try to raise awareness that, you know, within us, in the West, you know, there are all these people here, these women, so dedicated and so completely, you know, overlooked and ignored and struggling. The second announcement is that some people have asked if we could do a refuge ceremony. So I will explain that, and if anyone is interested, we can go ahead. Of course, as you know, the entry to the Buddhist path is through taking refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha in all Buddhist schools. So first I should emphasize you are not taking refuge in me. Right? You are taking refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha. I'm merely a conduit. And secondly, that it will be given in English. I translated the text because just as the Tibetans, when they took the Dharma into Tibet, translated it into Tibetan, they did not use Sanskrit. Likewise, it's only right that when we do these rituals and so forth, we should know what we're saying. How can we say it from the heart if we're saying blah, 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 blah? You know, we need to know what we are saying. Of course we do. And so it will be in English. And the third point is that along with that will be given, if there is an interest, the 5 precepts, the 5 basic precepts of not taking life, not taking what is not given, sexual misconduct, lying and slanderous speech, and not indulging in drugs and intoxicants, because, of course, in Buddhism, the whole point is to become in control of our mind, not to, therefore, abuse the mind by dulling it with intoxicants. So, again, these 5 precepts, since they will be given in English, if there's any precept which someone might individually feel they cannot observe at this time, then one would be permitted to just keep silent when that one is repeated. It's, you know, because you do know what you're saying, you won't find that you're saying something which you didn't intend to say. So if there is an interest in that, we can do so. Since this is being live webcast, then anybody out there who wishes to participate. That's perfectly okay. During the ceremony, if it could happen in your own home, that you have a statue of the Buddha, some kind of representation, then that is very best. But if not, then one just visualizes, because, you know, at that time, then all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the universe are watching this and rejoicing. So even though we cannot see them, they're there. And so one takes refuge, of course, in the Buddha as first of all, as the founder of the Buddhist path, but also, you know, all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the universe and one's own innate Buddha nature, and then the Dharma as being the reality and the path, and the Sangha as being those who are going to benefit us. And now Elizabeth is going to make an announcement.
Just going to tell you that it isn't being live streamed right
Oh,
now.
it isn't?
Until after lunch.
Oh.
So you might want to say that again after.
Okay. So anyway, I think if there is an interest in doing this, please let us know. Tomorrow, straight after the talk, I have to leave to catch a train to go to Wales, so we have to do it today. Because today we have time, it doesn't matter so much when we end. So please, if there is enough interest, I'll ask again after lunch. If there is enough interest, we can do it. If there isn't, then we won't. Okay, so don't feel you have to if you don't want to. So basically, I don't want to go on any further at this point with the text. So we will leave it there. One other announcement, since you're all sitting there, and we've got a few minutes in hand, is that another, all spiritual traditions have a problem in that they are inherently unbalanced in favor of the male. Now, there is nothing wrong with male input into any kind of spiritual tradition, but it becomes a problem when it is overwhelmingly the male voice that we are hearing. That brings it all out of balance. And certainly when I have attended Buddhist conferences, 98, 99% of the presenters are male. The female is very, very minor. Even the best, I was at a conference even in Taiwan, and there were 200 delegates and me. All male and myself. That was it. And recently we were at another conference in which, again, it took us 3 days to get there. When we got there, all the presenters were male, except for myself. When I got up to speak, they said, "We're running over time, you've got 5 minutes." So we have an organization called Sakyadhita. Sakyadhita literally means daughters of the Buddha. Sakya for Sakyamuni, Dita meaning daughter. And it is an international, non-sectarian women's organization. Non-sectarian means that people come from all the Buddhist countries, and as well as the West, and it is both nuns, monastics, and lay people both, mostly lay women. And nuns from all the different countries, from Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka, and then India, Tibet, Taiwan, Vietnam, Korea, and so forth. And this year, every 2 years, we meet in a different Buddhist country. And so this year, next year, in June 2017, we will be meeting in Hong Kong. So it is an opportunity for women to talk about Buddhism from the point of view of women. Of course, men also come, I mean, they're very welcome. It's not in any way a militant feminist movement. So men love it, actually. It's very warm, very fun. Everybody is very friendly with each other. It's not like any conference anybody's ever attended before. Many, many workshops, many, many talks and activities, as well as usually a pilgrimage to places of interest, of Buddhist interest. So it's a very beautiful organization, which, as I say, it's not pushing any particular agenda. It certainly is not emphasizing any particular aspect of the Buddhist world. It's everybody is equal, and but the emphasis is on hearing the female voice. It's a conference dealing with Buddhism from the perspective of women. And so I do encourage any of you who can do so to, first of all, download the whatever it's called. What?
They can go online to fill in an online application form.
Oh, you can go online to fill in an online application form. But anyway, I mean, do look it up. Sakyadhita, Sakyadhita. And I mean, most of the people I know who ever made the effort to attend continue to attend, because it is something very unique in the Buddhist world and really very enjoyable, and we need support. So please at least look it up and consider making the effort to participate, because this is for you, right? Okay, so apart from that, so we have a break now until 2 o'clock, and I hope you have a very pleasant lunch break, and bon appétit, and we will see you at 2.